I do want to talk mostly about Paul's letter to the Romans and just go into a little bit on the gospel. One of the things about St. Paul is that St. Paul says basically what happens. It makes me think about what would happen if there was no cross, because he talks about that necessity of the cross. So if there was no cross, you would probably either have people going down into a pit of silence, and certainly that's what a lot of the people in the early in the Old Testament believed until the Lord progressively revealed the idea of the resurrection, the idea that there would be a judgment at the end. Or it's that somehow this vague kind of a hope, more like winning the Powerball kind of a hope that somehow God would see maybe see the good or something, and somehow the good would outweigh the bad. But instead, what we see the cross. The cross takes away that idea of the weighing, that idea that somehow I'm a good person because the good deeds somehow outweigh the bad deeds. And so what St. Paul does is that he talks about salvation. It's that free gift from God. It's not based on our own abilities, our hard work, our intelligence. If it was, then that certainly would seem to be unfair. It certainly would seem to be, well, only the certain elite can be able to do it. But what about everybody else? So really, when we think about that idea, it has to be that everyone has that possibility. From the most intelligent to those who have developmental disabilities, from those who are strong and athletic to those who are not so athletic and strong, for those who have great intellectual abilities. All these kind of things has to have the ability to come to the Lord. And that really is that free gift. And so before St. Paul, before this, talks about the idea of the pagans. And the pagans certainly saw the attributes of God expressed in nature. But instead of following the Lord, what they did is that they followed the attributes of nature. They made nature a God, and they followed that. And so that was to their own detriment. The one thing that's interesting is that a lot of these things of nature were fertility cults, and fertility cults very quickly degenerated into gross immorality. So that's what we have from the pagans. From the Jewish people, they had the law, and the law was designed to help the people to live as free persons as they came into the promised land. They were still enslaved by idolatry. But the thing is that St. Paul in Galatians chapter 3 really thinks about that law as temporary. He calls the law a taskmaster, and hopefully leading the people to transition into leading by faith, into coming into that faith. And so what it does is that they have the idea that salvation is there for us. But one of the things about salvation is that it helps us to see that couple of things. One is that we're not necessarily in control. We want to think that we're in control. We can do everything. We can solve everything. We can solve our own issues. We're complete within ourselves. The other thing that we don't want to see is that we don't want to see that life is not our own. That if indeed the Lord has done this for us, then we should live for God. And so in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 18 to 20, St. Paul talks about that idea that people who were in the church in Corinth thought, oh, this is great, there's grace, so therefore we can live, be as bad as we want to be. But he says as follows, he says, shun immorality. Every sin that a man commits is outside the body, but the immoral man sins against his own body. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, and that you have from God? You are not your own. You are bought at a price. So glorify God in your body. And so that's the one thing that it helps us to see is really that we're not in control. B, we're not that life is not just about ourselves, our needs, our wants, our desires, but really going outside and showing that glory and goodness of God to others. taking what the Lord has given us and showing that love to others. And so one of the things about it is that it helps us, because there was a friend of mine who was a priest, and he was talking to this older priest one time, and he said, "Do you love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength?" And he thought about it, and he said, "I'm getting there." Or as my friend Monsignor Charles Pope says, "I'm not where I want to be, but I'm better than where I used to be." Not where I want to be, but I'm better than where I used to be. And so I think that gets that idea that life is that journey progressively bringing us closer to Christ. We can either go forward, we can either go backward, but we want to progress in our relationship with God. In the gospel, what we have is we have Jesus talking to having the apostles, and he's prepared now to send them out on mission 2 by 2. He says, don't go into the pagan territory, don't go into Samaria, because they're really not prepared to do so. They will be, but not at this point are they prepared to do so. But I think one of the things that he says is, ask the labor is extensive, but the laborers are few, and ask the Lord for those laborers for the harvest. And so one of the things in the Archdiocese of Washington is a few years ago, we had 16 guys ordained to the priesthood. And that was great. And we were like, yeah, this is great. But one of the things that we look at now is that we see really not too many guys who are going to be ordained in the next few years. So it gets a little bit tighter. And so one of the things that we always need to do is not rest on our laurels, but it can again continue to ask the Lord that master of the harvest to send the laborers for that vineyard, to pray for those who are in seminary, to pray for the seminarians that we've had this year, Aiden and Bartek, and to pray for all the seminarians, that the Lord may guide them in wisdom. Thanks, and God bless.